Extended Read 1. Remember to annotate as you read.
Queen Elizabeth I of England by Alan Wood.
I have the heart of a man, not a woman, and I am not afraid of anything. Queen Elizabeth I.
The time was January 1559, and the place was the country of England. In London, the capital city, throngs of citizens filled the streets. They came to watch a grand procession in which a 25-year-old noblewoman presented herself to the public. She was carried on a golden litter down a long carpet laid through the streets. After she passed by, people in the crowd clipped pieces from the carpet to keep as souvenirs. This notable procession was held to celebrate the coronation, or crowning, of a monarch. The noblewoman, named Elizabeth, was the country's new ruler. Queen Elizabeth I knew that her people wanted a good show, so her coronation was quite elaborate. Today, the cost of her coronation would be more than $5 million.
1. Litter. A covered and curtained coach. This portrait of Queen Elizabeth I, 1533 to 1603, is on display at the National Portrait Gallery in London.
Although Queen Elizabeth I was not the first female monarch of England, many people had a problem with a woman becoming the country's ruler. A fiery and powerful preacher named John Knox wrote in 1558, "It is more than a monster in nature that a woman should reign and bear empire over man." His opinion of female rulers was not unusual for the time or place. In 16th century England, as in most Western societies, roles for men and women were very different than they are today. The female sex was considered to be weaker than men, and this view applied to female royalty as well. Years later, Elizabeth I spoke of this issue in an address to her troops in August 1588, during a war with Spain. She said, "I know I have the body but of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." She would prove to be a very popular and powerful leader. Queen Elizabeth I reigned for 45 years and became one of the greatest monarchs in England's history.
This painting is titled Queen Elizabeth I of England, Faced with the Spanish Armada. It was painted by German artist Ferdinand Piloty II in 1861.
Fortunately, the subservient role of women in that era did not stop Queen Elizabeth I from becoming a powerful ruler. She was, in fact, an absolute monarch. She was the ultimate authority in the country, with final say in all matters. She governed everyone and everything in England. Her word was law, and her subjects had to obey. Any decision she made directly affected the lives of her people. Official advisors, known as ministers, aided the Queen in her work, but final decisions were hers. The role of Parliament. The Queen also had the help of Parliament, a legislative body that acted as a council for the monarchy. Members of Parliament came together whenever Queen Elizabeth I called for them. They discussed any issues facing the country. In fact, the word Parliament comes from Latin and French words that mean discussion. Members of Parliament were representatives of the people. They came from different walks of life. The upper chamber, known as the House of Lords, included noblemen and religious leaders. The nobles gained their seats by virtue of family heritage. The religious leaders were appointed by the Queen. The lower chamber, known as the House of Commons, included knights and community leaders. Members of the House of Commons were elected by shires or boroughs, an area similar to a county. Only men with a certain amount of wealth could vote.
This sculpture shows Queen Elizabeth I standing with advisors and other members of her court.
Together, the roughly 400 members of Parliament, or MPs, all men, debated issues and policies, gave advice to the Queen, and assisted in the collection of taxes. One of Parliament's most important functions was to draft bills for new laws. If a majority of parliamentary members supported a bill, it was sent to the monarch for a yea or nay vote. At the time, no bill could become a law without a king's or queen's approval.
In this historical painting, Elizabeth I addresses the members of Parliament. She sits on a throne before the House of Lords.
The unmarried Queen. The members of Parliament often pressured Elizabeth I to marry and produce a royal heir. However, she decided to go her own way. Although the Queen had many suitors and received a number of marriage proposals, she chose not to marry. There were several reasons for this choice. If she had married a foreign prince, he might have drawn England into foreign conflicts. If she had married an English nobleman, he might have drawn the Queen into infighting among different political groups. Instead, by not marrying, Elizabeth I was able to present herself as a selfless woman who sacrificed her happiness for the good of the nation. On not marrying, she once said, "I am already bound unto a husband, which is the kingdom of England."
A lock of Queen Elizabeth I's hair rests on a poem written to her by an admirer. It is on display at Wilton House near Salisbury, England. The Earl of Devon was one of Elizabeth I's suitors.
Religious differences. When Elizabeth I took the throne, England faced great differences over religion. For centuries, Catholicism had been the official religion of England. However, in recent years, more and more citizens had become Protestants. They rejected the traditions of the Catholic Church. They also wanted to see a Protestant ruler on the throne. In turn, many Catholics wanted to protect their customs and practices. Queen Elizabeth I helped resolve some of those differences. She helped establish the Protestant Church of England and appointed herself as the head. She declared that religious books and services must be in English rather than in Latin, which was the language of the Catholic Church. Protestantism became the official religion of England. However, Elizabeth I preserved certain Catholic traditions, such as the use of candles and crucifixes in worship services. Most citizens accepted this compromise, which helped avoid a religious war.
Elizabeth I's father, King Henry VIII, broke with the Catholic Church. He started the Church of England.
Today, the 45-year reign of Elizabeth I, called the Elizabethan era, is considered a golden age in England. The country flourished in the areas of art and exploration. William Shakespeare and other English writers of that time created works that are still read and performed today around the world. Francis Drake and other English explorers helped establish colonies for England. In addition, the English Navy became one of the best in the world, making the nation an important European power. The Elizabethan era witnessed many problems, though, including inefficient local government and corrupt ministers. High prices compounded by a period of slow economic growth created a depression. Poor people suffered the most from the country's fiscal difficulties. In addition, the country faced threats of invasion from France, Spain, Scotland, and Ireland. However, with a strong military, the Queen was able to avoid or subdue attacks. Most famously, in 1588, the English Navy blocked an invasion by the supposedly invincible fleet of warships, the Spanish Armada.
This painting shows William Shakespeare performing for Queen Elizabeth I and her court in 1594. It was painted by Swiss artist John James Shallon, 1778 to 1854.
Queen Elizabeth I died on March 24, 1603. On her deathbed, with no children or heirs, she named her cousin, James VI, Prince of Scotland, as her successor. He became King James I. Even in the wake of her reign, Elizabeth I was seen as one of the country's most successful monarchs. Long after her death, she remained beloved by the people. For 200 years, the date that she gained the throne was celebrated as Accession Day, a national holiday. Late in her life, in an address to Parliament in 1601 that became known as the Golden Speech, Elizabeth I said, "This I account the glory of my crown, that I have reigned with your loves."
This sculpture marks the tomb or burial site of Queen Elizabeth I at Westminster Abbey. 1533. Queen Elizabeth I is born. 1558. Elizabeth I becomes queen. 1563. The Queen revises doctrine of Church of England. 1588. The English Navy stops a Spanish invasion. 1601. Elizabeth I gives the Golden Speech before Parliament. 1603. Queen Elizabeth I dies and is succeeded by King James I.